Good evening, everyone. Thank you, TEDx Lovedale and the Lawrence School for inviting me here to speak today. I'm here to talk about my practice, a bodily practice. Dance is often seen as a bodily practice. Much like a lot of the activities that I've seen a lot of your students doing, whether it's horse riding or archery or tennis or football or badminton. But somehow, because these are bodily practices, we think that the mind is somehow not primarily important here. And so a sort of dismemberment of the mind and the body happens. And I think that this is something that we need to question. The second thing is, dance is a dynamic bodily practice. And it's not a static form. And so in that situation, change is extremely important. And so that's why I'm here to talk about how the change in a bodily practice, even in a bodily practice, begins in the mind. So the way I understand it, change happens on multiple levels and to varying degrees. So if you talk about the multiple layers, the first layer, you could call it the upper crust. And this upper crust is, the topmost layer of change. Now this change it's fleeting, it's not enduring, and ultimately, I think, in my opinion, it is exposed as superficial, and therefore not really desirable, meaningful change. In the context of dance, it would mean maybe you do a new theme or a new choreography, but your approach to the dance form and the practice remains the same, so there isn't a deep, meaningful change there. Another kind of change is extreme change, and this is a radical shift from the practice that you are seeking to find change in, and you completely reject it. So, for example, there are dance practitioners, Indian classical dance practitioners, who may have completely rejected their art forms and gone to move on to other dance forms. And it's wonderful in one sense, because it is a change for you as a person, the person who has rejected this particular bodily practice and moved on to another. But it doesn't actually change the practice itself, the one that you ran away from because you wanted to see change in it. Then there is the level of, there's a mid-level change that occurs. And this is quite well-intentioned. There is a desire for change there. But it's not properly thought through. So here, for example, in the context of dance, there may be an acknowledgement of Bharatanatyam's history or Bharatanatyam's past, but it doesn't translate into your bodily practice in terms of the performance that follows this narrative or this announcement. So what I consider to be highly valuable for art, and or actually for that matter, any bodily practice or any practice, is a deep change at the core. And this requires a deeply analytical, investigative, and critical application of the mind. And so in the context of dance, this takes you into a deeper investigation into what we think and how we think about the dance form or the practice. And when we talk about that, we're not just talking about the form itself, but also its origins, its history, its evolution, and we have to connect that past to the present, contextualize its context to all of its surroundings, and then possibly carve out future possibilities for change. And this mindful change is then what brings it out into, an external outward body of work. Why is change in dance important, or change in a practice important? I've already kind of brushed upon it, but basically I think it's at the level of our human nature. Humans crave change. We tire of repetition. We get bored of the mundane. So of course there is comfort in familiarity, there's no doubt about that. And from time to time, it's important for us to go back to that comfort. But I don't think that the comfort of familiarity really pushes an art form to really breathe, and for a tradition to truly breathe. For that kind of transformative breath, breathing life into something, that requires something more cerebral. And moreover, I think that when you when you are forced to create change, you are also forced to step out of your comfort zone. You are forced to step into the realm of discovery and innovation and creativity. And this is extremely exciting. This challenge is very exciting for human beings. And so I think that, you know, this is why I think change is essential in all practices, and since I'm a Bharatanatyam dancer, I will say in artistic bodily practices like Bharatanatyam, and all of this, all of this that I'm talking about, it's all cerebral. My dance company Vyuti and my solo work as well over the last decade or so is a result of very fundamental changes in my thinking about what Bharatanatyam is, what it could be in the future, what my role could possibly be in subtly questioning things in its past, connecting and addressing things in the present, and carving new possibilities in the future, in my own personal capacity. But I encourage artists and practitioners of bodily practices to undergo this cerebral kind of transformative change. How does it begin in the mind? I think for starters, you have to start learning about the history, about the past, and you have to know what something was at one point of time in order to then start creating a change from it. So you have to know the original, only then you can start creating differences and changes in it. And this is something that you can do at a postgraduate level, which is what I did. You can also do it through platforms that you create, like the one that I co-founded called Re-Cognising Dance. And this is where this kind of thinking and reading and researching is what leads to, or in my case, what led to questions about whether Bharatanatyam is an ancient and traditional dance form that has this unbroken, pure past with a smooth and organic sort of congenial evolution. Or is Bharatanatyam a constantly evolving dance form, one that could possibly embody multiple forms, multiple sub-forms, multiple styles, multiple interpretations, multiple traditions, multiple modernities? Dance has already changed quite a lot. It had already changed by the time it came into the hands of people like me. And for this, you have to read the history of Bharatanatyam. I will not go into it because I've already given a talk about that, a TEDx talk about that many years ago. But it definitely did change in form, content, presentation, who performed it. And this change, whether this change was needed or not, is a matter of debate. And it's a matter of open debate, but this change did happen nonetheless. The dance form did survive, and it survived with its flaws because it largely still continues to fail to acknowledge the legendary hereditary dance communities of India, and it largely continues to fail to acknowledge that there was an erasure of that community that took place. But having said that, since that is not the topic of this talk today, it did survive with a beauty of its own and an aesthetic of its own. And this post-reinvented, post-anti-notch movement, post the dance form being banned in temples and coming out onto the proscenium stage, and the performers changing, the demographic of the performers changing, it did survive in its own way, and this is the form that I have learned. And I have loved this form in its own way. I've loved its aesthetic, I've clung to it actually. But having known the history of this dance form, the quite turbulent in some ways history of this dance form, I found that I could no longer practice it in the way that it was taught to me. So, therefore, my vision then a decade ago and continues to be to find a way in my practice to honor the past, address the present, and also explore future possibilities. In terms of the past, I have tried to question the past, and not question the past, but tried to question why we don't talk about the past by questioning the Bharatanatyam's widely accepted solo format and fully frontal format. So Vyuti's Alaripu, which is an invocatory piece, as well as our production called Questioning Frontality, was an example of how I played around with fronts, I played around with multiple bodies and interweaving bodies together. And on the surface, again, it might look like, oh, this has changed Bharatanatyam in terms of its outward presentation. But what it was really trying to do was, it was meant to be a reminder to audiences that Bharatanatyam wasn't always solo. It wasn't always fully frontal, especially not when it was performed in temples, not when it was performed in other situations apart from the proscenium stage. And it was an invitation to audiences to dig deeper into Bharatanatyam's history and past and try and learn more about it and find out who were the people that were performing it before us, and so on and so forth. This is an excerpt from one of the explorations. So this form, what you see here is actually the Alaripu, which is traditionally performed in a solo way. So it would be this, just one person, one body. All of this would also just be just one person performing. The whole thing is one body. Actually, traditionally, it's all one body. So the large screen that you see is the fully frontal one, and the smaller screen that you see is when we had audiences sitting on multiple sides, so we had to re-choreograph the Alaripu itself to cater to all the audiences sitting on multiple sides. So another way that I tried to honor the past was, and also draw attention to it, was try to play around with alternative narratives. So there's quite a famous historical debate that went on between whether bhakti should take importance in Bharatanatyam's revived version, or whether Shringara or sensuality should. And this debate has been ongoing for quite some time. Vyuti's work tried to step outside of that debate by incorporating elements of both devotion and sensuality, but also shift the primary focus to something else: human emotions, female friendship. So the Vyuti's narrative piece was called Sakhi, and it focused, rather than on love or devotion, it focused on female friendship and the solidarity between the female protagonist, the Naika, and her female friend, the Sakhi. Even in my solo work, I've also tried to explore alternative narratives, where again I've moved away from the Bhakti and Shringara narratives and did a piece on betrayal and forgiveness. Now these are emotions, but the focus of the piece was more to do with the dilemma in the mind. Should I forgive and forget what has happened, or should I confront this person who's betrayed me? So it was about the internal dilemma of the mind. Coming to the present, and how I try to address the present through trying to create change through addressing the present. 5 years ago, I found that I was pregnant, and there was a lot of questions that came about whether I was going to continue to dance. I was also encouraged widely not to dance. I was told that the pregnant dancing body is not an aesthetic thing to see on stage, and that it was not safe for me to dance. After I checked with the gynecologist, who said it's totally fine for you to dance, I created a series of performances, as you can see on the right. I created a series of performances where I danced and performed right up to my 8th month of pregnancy, and I tried to advocate very strongly for dancers to continue to dance as long as your doctors tell you that it's safe, to continue to dance all through your pregnancies, and also to encourage audiences to step out of their comfort zones and see that the pregnant dancing body is actually very beautiful to look at. And it's amazing to see how much the pregnant dancing body actually can do. Even though you're carrying all the baby and the amniotic fluid and your placenta and all of that, but it's possible to do everything. I did splits, I got lifted, I did a lot of rigorous performances, and it's highly possible. So that's another way in which I tried to create change. More recently, in response to what is happening in Palestine and the atrocities against children in Gaza, I started a movement called Indian Dancers for Gaza's Children, and we managed to raise over $12,000 for the children, for the treatment of children, the gravely injured children in Gaza. And this was the first time that Indian classical dancers across the world realized that they can use their art form as activism. that you can stand up and say, as an artist, as a classical dancer, I do not stand for this. I do not stand for this violence, and I will do my bit to do something about it. And a beautiful piece also came out of it, which I based on Faiz Ahmed Faiz's poem, Filistini Bachcho Ke Liye Lori, a lullaby for Palestinian children. Now, in terms of the future, and I'm coming to an end, I know that I might be overstepping the time limit. In terms of the future, there are other ways in which I've tried to create change in Bharatanatyam, these are more abstract. You know, the past and the present has been a lot to do with socio-political issues and trying to figure out redressals of wrongs in the past and things like that. But I think the future, we also need to look at the form itself and how we're going to create change within the form itself. And so there have been ways in which I've tried to incorporate lifts and floor work and abstraction and alternative music, de-ornamentation of the Bharatanatyam presentation, and all of this is future-oriented. My latest exploration, which I'm very delighted to share a short clip of, is a completely undiscovered genre in Bharatanatyam, far removed from Bhakti and Shringara. This is called Adhyatma, which means the metaphysical, and this whole piece actually is about the endlessness of the mind. Here's a clip. So as you can see, the music is quite different. The presentation, the costumes are very different. There's you know, in Bharatanatyam you very rarely see the dancers' hands touching the floor. Very rarely see the spines or the backs of dancers touching the floor. But all of it, every single movement has originated from the Bharatanatyam vocabulary and has gone into abstraction. So it has elements of sensuality in it. It has elements of devotion, but ultimately it's questioning, it's investigating, it's thinking about what is the mind, how does the mind work, what are the internal conflicts within the mind. So all of these examples that I've given you are all examples of how you can make your body think. In a bodily artistic practice, your mind, you fundamentally change the way you think about a bodily artistic practice, and that then is able to translate into your body thinking and your body becoming a vehicle of change because you applied your mind to it and question things constantly. And so what I will conclude with this, what really makes it possible to bring about wholesome, organic, inclusive, and positive change within a dance form. And when I say dance form, I do mean any bodily practice, and I hope that it is able to be applied to all practices, and possibly one day transform these practices into forms with multiple, constantly evolving, in other words, changing and expanding possibilities, is a change that begins in the mind. Thank you.